Welcome to Dead Folks Tales, a New Orleans-centric podcast exploring Southern Gothic stories, history, and hauntings, with your host, paranormal and fantasy author, Nola Nash. Find out more at nolanash.com. Now, let's talk about dead people.
Welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're with us tonight. If you are watching us live, feel free to drop those comments into the comment section wherever you are watching. We'll keep an eye on those and try to get to some of your questions if they happen to appear there for us and we've got time to answer them. Otherwise, if you're watching after the fact, any of the recorded shows, or if you are listening to the podcast, please post those comments. We do check those out as well. So we are glad to have you, whether you're watching live or listening to us in the audio podcast. So thank you so much for joining us for Dead Folks Tales. I am excited tonight because we are going to talk about short stories. And as a novelist, short stories are something that intimidate me. So does poetry, because I am used to having many, many chapters to develop a story, to develop characters, to do all of those things that these phenomenal short story writers manage to do in just a few pages. So I am a huge fan of short stories, and especially this time of year. As an English teacher for years, I have taught those great creepy stories, The Landlady by Roald Dahl, lots of Edgar Allan Poe. And I'm just a sucker for a well-written, a great short story. So I'm excited to have Jim Lambert joining me today. And Jim, go ahead, and for our listeners and our viewers who don't know who you are, go ahead and tell them a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, I'm a native of Louisiana. I grew up in central Louisiana, and some and quite a few of the stories are based there. I was also lived in New Orleans for a while, where I started practicing law. I met my wife down there, and am a resident primarily in the last several decades in Lafayette, in the Cajun country. And I have always had an admiration for writers, and I think many lawyers in their heart would love to be a writer. And when I retired, it was kind of like the old saying, if not now, when, and if not who then you, and it was either, as they say in central Louisiana, fish or cut bait. And so I found a great editor, Val Matthews, in Athens, Georgia, and she helped me work on the stories for a couple of years. And I released this collection, Rosa and Other Stories, in January. And I'm pleased to say it's gotten some good reviews from the Kirkus people and some local newspapers. And, we're just trying to get it out to more people and hopefully share this. It's just a part of a creative act that I wanted to do.
Now, your short stories are very creative. You've got some interesting characters that are part of your stories, and having so little space in, the number of words and the number of pages. What is one of your challenges for developing those characters and making sure that that your readers understand them and really get them in that kind of short space that you have? How do you attack that and make sure that they come to life the way that you want them to?
Well, all my stories kind of start with some nugget, and it's usually something I see. I've heard a little bitty story or part of a story that someone has told me, and there's an emotional anchor there, that kind of I can build a story around, and then the voice of the narrator, whether it's a first person or maybe a more dispassionate third person. I try to, get that voice and find a true voice. And when you do that, I think you can create a story with kind of an economy of words. You're intimidated by short stories. I'm intimidated by novels, the idea of writing a novel. But, we have, I think, 12 or 13 stories in this collection. And I guess it ends up being about the same as, in terms of pages. But I've always enjoyed stories. I'm like you. In English class, we read the great stories. It was a genre that was very more dominant back in the 30s, the 40s, and before that even. And the novel now, of course, is the dominant literary genre. Short stories really should be, in my opinion, very popular today because of people's demands on their time and attention span and so forth. You can sit down and read one in 20, 30, 40 minutes or an hour and then go to sleep,
Yeah.
The next one.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember, of course, teaching things like Poe and those short stories, but in school, Rudyard Kipling and all of these great stories that you really could dive into, digest in that short period of time and walk away with a full experience. And it's that magic when that happens, kind of like with poetry. I'm incredibly intimidated by having to harness an emotion or harness a moment in time in so few words and really communicate it effectively. It's the same thing with a short story. That I love that you said the economy of words. That's a great way to put it, because as a teacher, I've always said, every word matters. The author of this short story agonized over word choice. So let's not discount that and not really carefully examine how they constructed that sentence, how they built that scene, because there is so much craft that goes into a short story. I fear that people discount, because it's short, the amount of work that really goes into getting a good short story right. And that's something that, even though I can't write them, I am such a champion of, because I understand that. As a writer, as you're sitting down and working on this, do you find yourself editing down a longer story and kind of pulling those details and refining as you go? Or do you have that nugget that then you're kind of finding that sweet spot of more kind of fleshing out that particular moment in time or that particular emotion that you're trying to convey? Is it a growing process or a shrinking process to fit it right in that right perfect length for you?
I think probably more for me a growing process. It's kind of like, and my process is pretty slow. A lot of people will write a story in a couple of days, and it varies. I've had some that just spilled out, but I don't write, a 25-page story and then edit it down to, 10 pages or something like that. Many of the literary journals these days want really short stories. They want 2,500 words, 6 or 7 pages.
So short.
It's very short. They really want super short stories. And,
that's like Reader's Digest short. Those were short stories.
Yes, I'm telling you that a lot of the more modern literary journals want that. And I have a few that I constructed like that. Kind of a few that are kind of in an experimental form. Some of them don't have characters. Some of them don't have dialogue. I'm just trying to do some different things. I got some ideas from Joyce Carol Oates and listening to her master class, and decided let's try this, and it's kind of fun.
So you have chosen, we're talking about dead people here. We're going to talk about the Jim Crow. You and I talked about Jim Crow laws, and an interesting thing that, speaking about Alexandria, Louisiana being where you're from,
Right.
And not a lot of people know a whole lot about Alexandria, Louisiana. When people think, outside of the state and outside of that region, it seems to be New Orleans is what we all gravitate to. Everybody's mind goes to New Orleans, the surrounding river parishes and the plantations and everything down there. But there was a lot of history, especially Civil War history and then after, that happened all over the state, and it wasn't always pretty. And there's a whole lot that perhaps was hidden, and you came across some things that were hidden that then went on to inspire you.
Yes, there's two major incidents that led to two stories of mine. One was the Colfax massacre that occurred in 1873 during Reconstruction. And essentially, there was a big fight over an election, and three white militia units surrounded a courthouse full of black Republican troops. And, there was a battle on Easter Day. And 100, there's a plaque outside the Colfax courthouse until about 3 months ago. It stood from 1950 until about 3 months ago, and it celebrated, the great victory, and they called it a Colfax riot, where three whites and 150 Negroes were killed, and
wow.
It said this marked the beginning of the end of carpetbag misrule in the South, and it was erected by the state of Louisiana. And I saw that about 15 years ago, and I was taking some pictures, and I've never heard of this thing. And I started doing some research. It was a major thing in 1873. President Grant sent troops down here.
Whoa.
There was a U.S. Supreme Court decision, a major decision about the 14th Amendment. And nothing appeared in our Louisiana history books about this. Nothing. And, another sad incident, a very sad incident, occurred 7 weeks after Pearl Harbor in Alexandria. Alexandria was surrounded by major training bases in World War II. And there was a section for Negro troops to come, and there were bars and theaters and things like this. And, a huge fight broke out of some type. And about 80 police officers just opened up on unarmed Negro troops wearing the Army uniforms. And as many as 18 men were killed. And this was hushed up. And there was a report by the Army that, oh, yes, some troops were wounded, but no one was killed. Everything's back to normal. They did not want this out to the Nazis or to the Japanese at this point. It was only 7 weeks after Pearl Harbor, and it would have been a propaganda disaster. But I had heard about this, rumors about this, as a boy coming up, and I started looking into it, and luckily, the historian had really done some great work in the Louisiana Historical Quarterly. And so I built a story around an investigation of this, a fictional investigation, and the story's called Report to Mrs. Roosevelt. But, both these stories are, I like to write about historical, I put words into the mouths of dead people. Mm-hmm. But trying to be faithful to history, but imagining what we don't have, imagining Mrs. Roosevelt really wanted an investigation of this, which I think she probably did, and an appeal was made by black ministers in Alexandria to the White House to do that. So,
it's an interesting take on these stories that have been intentionally buried, to then dig them back up again and give them voice. And
right.
I really love, especially that niche there, that very unique location, that very unique story.
Yeah.
You spoke about that nugget that you just kind of latch on to, and what a fascinating nugget to be able to expand then and take that moment and turn that into that creative fiction and that short story.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
How do you feel like those stories has been received? Have people been amazed to find out that these things actually happened, that was actually history and not just something that was created by the author?
Sure. Yes, they have. I mean, I wish I could say the book was a huge bestseller and, thousands
Don't
of
we
people
all?
But yes, I think, it's very timely. I mean, it's, we have all this discussion right now of critical race theory, and, the objections to critical race theory remind me of a quote that I heard attributed to Harry Truman. And he said, those Republicans say I give them hell. I don't give anybody hell. I just tell the truth and they think it's hell.
Wow.
And
It's an interesting quote.
it's a great quote. And I mean, what we're doing is bringing this truth forward. The book, I don't know if you are aware of the great book written by Isabel Wilkerson, Caste. It's probably the best book on race and the establishment, essentially, of a caste system in America for the last 400 years. And it is she's already won the Pulitzer Prize in the past, and I suspect she'll probably win it for that book. But it was a fantastic book, and these books bringing forth the history, the great monument now. I mean, the work that's being done by the Equal Justice Initiative. I don't know if you're aware of the great memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, to lynching, and that is if you've never been there, to our viewers, it is as powerful as the Vietnam Memorial or the 9/11 Memorial.
Wow!
It is truly an amazing thing. They've got a museum called the Legacy Museum about Jim Crow and slavery, and I learned things I had no idea. I thought I knew some stuff before I started reading and learning, and I've got a lot more to learn probably, but
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much that we can learn from all it, and it's great that there are people willing to bring those things to light and willing to tell the stories of those whose voices have been silenced. And there's so many different people out there from, I love the work that so many people are pushing forward for, women who have been abused, that have been silenced over the past, and their voices coming to light. Indigenous people, African Americans, so many voices that are coming into literature and really bringing together such a beautifully woven tapestry of stories. And what a great way to find those nuggets that are in your own backyard that maybe you didn't even know about that, and that's where you grew up, and then there it is. There's a story to be told, and to take that and to tell that story and bring that fiction with that historical truth in it makes it so much more accessible to people than here's the plaque on the courthouse, here, read the plaque, there it is. Bring that to life so that people can appreciate it.
You read the plaque and you go, what the hell, that can't be a riot.
That can't be right.
153. Come on, and it's absurd. It's absurd, really. But anyway, a lot of absurdities.
Now, tell us. You have some excerpts, and I would love for you to choose one of those that you would like to read for us. Again, as you're listening, folks, it is all about word choice. It is about how you create this tale to be told in a short space. Every word matters. So what would you like to share with us, Jim?
Well, I saw, of course, on your website, your great love for the city of New Orleans.
Absolutely.
And, again, we're going to have a little hidden history about New Orleans. It may be that many people don't understand or realize that Lee Harvey Oswald lived in New Orleans. His family was from New Orleans, and he was born, I think he was born in New Orleans, but he definitely lived there for a number of years as a young man, as a child, as well as other cities. He lived in New York City for a while and Dallas for a while, but he went to junior high and high school, I think briefly, and then he went into the Marines. But this is a little story called Lee and Me, and it's written, from the perspective of a young man who is a friend of Lee Harvey Oswald. And I'll just read the very, beginning of this. They kind of get into some escapades. They go around the French Quarter, where Lee actually lived on Exposition Place.
Teenagers in the French Quarter. It's never a good thing.
Teenagers in the French Quarter, and at an Elvis concert in Pontchartrain Beach. So,
oh wow!
And all of these things actually happened around the same time.
I've been to Pontchartrain Beach. That's funny to think that I have been to Pontchartrain Beach and Lee Harvey Oswald was at Pontchartrain Beach.
Yeah, he was. Well, we don't know that for sure.
We don't know for sure, but I bet he did.
In this story, he did. So here we go. You know him as Lee Harvey Oswald, the crazy assassin who killed President John F. Kennedy. We just called him Lee. I met him in 1954 on the corner of King Street and Jefferson Davis Parkway in New Orleans. We were on what is called the neutral ground. That's the land between the traffic lanes on big boulevards. I've never figured out why they call it neutral ground, because there wasn't anything neutral about it. It was more of a battleground, boys and men fighting all the time. Lee and me, we met during a fight. A bunch of us ninth graders were hanging out at the playground, and 5 hoods from Warren Eastern High School came up and jumped us. There was about 8 or 9 of us, but those boys were older, and one of them wrapped his belt around his fist and started wailing away on Lee. Lee was a skinny kid, just assigned to my homeroom class. I felt sorry for him. I grabbed a fallen limb from one of the live oaks and whacked that hood upside his head. He fell off Lee just long enough for the 2 of us to take off running toward Bayou St. John a few blocks away. The hoods took out after us. The boy with the belt looked like a charging bull with crazy eyes and a little streak of blood coming from his ear. As we neared the bayou, I yelled to Lee, "I'm Murray. What's your name?" "Lee. Thanks for helping. What the hell are we going to do?" We both stood breathless on the bank of the bayou as the hoods drew nearer. "Can you swim?" I yelled. We got to swim the bayou. Let's go." We dove into Bayou St. John and started swimming for the other side. The hood stopped at the water's edge. We made it across the dark green water and ran toward City Park, where we hid in some thick bushes until after sunset. Lee looked at me and smiled. "Man, you saved my ass. I owe you." "Why'd you do it? Those guys could have killed both of us." "I don't know. I just reacted. I saw that limb. I always take up for the underdog." There, among the bushes, we traded our histories, short as they were at the time. Lee's daddy died before he was born. He and his mom had moved around a lot, just returned from a stint in New York where he got thrown in the can as a juvenile delinquent. The 2 now lived in a tiny apartment in the French Quarter above a pool hall on Exchange Alley. He told me he could get me into the pool hall because his uncle knew the owner. He could teach me some pool shots and how to throw darts. He seemed like a cool kid, the kind I wanted to get to know, especially the part about the pool hall. I never met a real juvenile delinquent.
Never met a real juvenile delinquent. Oh, but what his future has in store.
Oh, yes.
That's a great. I love the perspective from the friend who's getting
Yeah.
to know Lee in this way.
Right.
And that, I think, is a great perspective for the readers too, because in many ways, young Lee Harvey Oswald is not the one that we know. And so it's interesting to understand his teenage years as well in that fictional context.
Just a kid, and I mean, you'd be surprised what you can find reading the Warren Commission reports. It's amazing, all the stuff unbelievable amount of background in there. And I kind of got into reading some of that. It was just, wow.
Fascinating stuff. And speaking of your research, Denise Burt, who is a friend of the show, friend of mine, gotta love Denise. Thank you for joining us tonight, Denise, and posting your question for us. She's looking forward to reading your work, Jim, because you are a new author to her. But she had a question for you about your research process. So has there been something in particular, something that stood out that perhaps was the most fascinating or surprising thing during your research process, either about Lee Harvey Oswald or just any of the things that you have been researching lately? I know you discovered the story that we were just talking about before, and then Lee Harvey Oswald. You have a lot of things that you have researched for these stories. What perhaps has been the most surprising or fascinating part?
Well, I have to go back, it always, goes back to the original sin of America, which is slavery, and it goes all the way through. And I think what was really surprising to me was reading about the racial violence that occurred during World War II you know,
it seems so recent, you know. I mean, we don't think about that at the time.
But we know. We think everybody was patriotic and
Mhm.
pulling together, and we're gonna beat these bad guys and fight for democracy and freedom. And there were murders, there were riots, there were soldiers. Black soldiers were killed in a number of places. Some of them were lynched at Fort Benning. I mean, they're in Mobile, Alabama. There was a shortage of workers, and the shipyard, I guess was asked by the federal government to hire some black workers, and there was the whites went crazy, and they had to call troops in to restore order. Yeah, so this is going on in the United States at the same time we're prosecuting a war. I think that was one of the saddest points of research that I found. But I mean, I do have, I like to do research as a lawyer. I've was a lawyer for 43 years and however many, 44 years, something like that. Who's counting? And but research was fun. I mean, most of the time we spent talking on the phone, but when you could actually get in the library and dig in and do some research, it can be fun, even legal research. And so I love the process. And now of course we've got so much available on the internet. It's just unbelievable. And
I find myself in rabbit holes if I linger too long. Boy, I have a hard time pulling myself back out of the research.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, we could talk for hours about things that you've got going on, the research that you've done. You and I have had some fascinating conversations before the show, getting to know each other as well. So great stuff that you have drawn from in these stories. I hope that folks pick up the book. I hope that they get to know you a little better and these stories, because short stories are a great platform to tell those important little micro moments in time. And I really hope people understand the craft that goes into writing short stories. So I am in awe of that. And I thank you so much for sharing your craft with us, your history with us, your stories with us. And I appreciate you so much joining me on this show. Let folks know how they can find you online as well.
Well, I have a website. It's jameslambertauthor.com. I'm on
And the
Facebook.
link is in the description for this show. So folks can go click that as well and find you there. And the book is on Amazon.
All the platforms, iBooks, Books A Million, etc. It's a very good price for digital, $3.99, and
Nice.
you can't get much for $3.99. You get maybe.
I'm not sure you can get a coffee for that anymore.
Yeah, get a Big Mac for that. I don't know, a Coke. I mean, so you can buy my book for the price of a large Coke. How about that? Or a very fancy coffee, and. But I've enjoyed it. You're very kind. Comments, appreciate it very much, and I thank you for the opportunity to try to let people know a little bit more about my book. And I'm just doing something creative after 40 years as a lawyer. I want to do something different, and this is part of it.
I'm so glad that you shared your stories with everyone and that you found that creative outlet. And it's been an absolute delight getting to know you. And I hope that folks will check out the book. Great stories in there. And, guys, go find those short stories and appreciate them for the work that goes into them, just like you would a novel that you would pick up by your favorite author. And go find some great characters nestled in those pages, because they are definitely there. And Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
All right.
Thank you all for joining us for this episode.
Best of luck with your work as well.
Thank you so much. And best of luck with the book. I hope that you have just wild success, and hopefully some more of those little nuggets will find you so you have more stories to tell as well.
I got a couple cooking right now. Thank you.
Yes. Awesome. Well, definitely let me know when those are going, because I would love to hear about those as well. All right, folks, until next time. Good night.
Dead Folks Tales is a copywritten podcast of Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. Special thanks to producer Roman Suritin and executive producer Pam Stack. Join us next week for another episode of Dead Folks Tales.